Monday, May 13th. If you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I want to give notice that we were in executive session, which is actually what caused our delay, discussing some legal issues. And we will start out the evening with a presentation. I don't know if everybody saw, there were on the table some the system tree risk review. I believe Mr. Hosbach and Mr. Foster are going to lead us on this one.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners and township staff, and also members of the Radnor community who are here with us in person or maybe watching on TV. I'm going to start off the presentation, and then I'm going to turn it over to John. He's going to talk about the evaluation and the results from that. But just to give a little process to what we're doing tonight, this is strictly an introduction. And how the introduction will go, you'll hear everything that has been done by John in regards to the evaluation. And what we'll be looking for from you is if there's any questions, if you could save those to the end. If there's any changes you would like us to make in this presentation, we'll definitely add those. And then from the board, we're then going to go to Shade Tree. And we're going to have to make the same presentation again to them. And we're going to take their recommendations and get their approval, and then we'll come back to you. After we've made those changes, whatever remedies that they might ask for, then we'll also go over the action plan of how the township plans to remedy the situation, the findings from John's report. So with that, I'll then turn it over to John, and he'll take it from there, and then I'll come back up at the end.
Good evening, commissioners. John Hosbach, I'm your consulting forester and arborist. Thank you, Ricky, for that brief introduction. So, risk and why. So, we performed a study on 14 of your parks. These are the parks that are outlined here. They're not in chronological order based on severity. These are the parks that in the past recent years we have not performed a standard of care. We haven't done any risk reviews. The last time these trees were reviewed were about 10 years ago. We performed a heavy-duty risk assessment along with culling any of the dead trees throughout the parks. So we have the 14 trees here, 14 parks.
Did you say we have not performed the standard of care?
On those trees. So we haven't done our due diligence by performing a risk review.
Okay.
Yep. So during the course of our tree review at the 14 parks, we reviewed 4,100 trees. From those 4,100 trees, we have a total of 255 trees that require care through removals. 255 of these trees were observed as being risk-related and require removal. Out of the total 255, 117 of these trees are ash. All these trees are impacted through emerald ash borer. Here's a little outline of the species we found. So you can see from the top, 117 trees, which is 33% of the total culling, are all ash. Then we get down to Norway maple, which is invasive in Pennsylvania, and then down to tall poplar, red oak, and red maple, and white oak.
John?
Yep.
With the ash trees, 117 that are just in some sort of declining state, or like, how many ash trees are in these parks?
So there's 117 that are totally dead, that are within risk of falling today. So there's other ash within the parks, but they're not within striking distance of any activity areas.
Okay.
Yep. So they're trees that would fall into the wooded areas. They're not within lawn areas, picnics, drive lanes, trails. These are ones that are within striking distance of the targets.
So if they're not within striking distance, the thought process is leave them up and let them fall?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep. So here are some of the defects that we observed. So we have dead branches. Obviously, these trees will be pruned. There's 92 prunings. Obviously, as we just spoke about, the dead emerald ash borer trees. We have decline beyond recovery, so anything greater than 40%. We have root and stem decay, 100% dead, basal cavity decay, multiple defects, excessive lean with root decay, poor structure, trees that were previously damaged through storm damage, bifurcated, and snags that were left from previous storm damages that are within striking distance of the trails. So our methodologies. So we performed a track risk review. It's a level 1 risk assessment. It's a visual with sounding. We did some resistograph testing. We looked at all the possible targets, any person, place, or object that can be impacted if the tree or parts of the trees were to fail. High-risk trees only. So we did not look for trees. We weren't looking forecasting out. We were looking at trees today that could potentially fail. And then we quantify the risk. Only trees within the immediate or high risk were reported. Here's a few pictures. Here's a Norway maple. This is right along a trail. You can see the cavity. The tree is with the striking distance. That should be removed immediately. Dead red oak. The entire top of this tree is dead within striking distance of a road. Here's a red maple. The 2 slashes denote removal. 1 slash denotes pruning. This tree obviously is right within harm's way of a tot lot area, playground, and this tree has decayed throughout the entire root system up into the main stem. Tree markings, as I denoted, 2 purple slashes removal, 1 for pruning. Here's one of the ash trees that's been dead for probably around 7 years. This is within striking distance of one of the trails down at Skunk Hollow. Another tree inhabited by a lot of people. There's cars parked. This tree is about 30 feet in height and within striking distance of both a trail and a pedestrian corridor.
Hey, John, is there any concern? So you've gone out there, you've looked at these, you've marked them for removal, and particularly based on their proximity to a parking lot or a trail. But we've left them up for 4 or 5 months. Like, what risk are we taking on, knowing that you're saying that they could fall or they need to be taken down because of concern of falling?
So all these trees were rated as high risk. We're the risk assessors. Obviously, the township is a risk manager. We are going to be putting together, I believe, and I'll let Ricky speak on behalf of putting this out to bid over a course of time. I'll let Ricky talk about that a little further. But to answer your question, these were all cataloged as high-risk trees.
Yeah, so Bill, can I just, have you talked to the insurers? Like, what risk are we taking on? Like, we've marked them, so we know that they're a risk.
Yeah, if we could, just let's finish the presentation. I think Ricky's going to touch on some of the liability issues. If we still have those types of questions, we can answer them. We've talked multiple times with our insurance company and the exposure in terms of liability over the course of the last couple of months as part of this. So we can provide that information.
Thank you, John. Yeah, exactly. First, before we go into some of the rest to answer your question, Commissioner Abel, the budget considerations. We talked about almost 300 trees, prunings and removal. So there's a process that we would have to go. We didn't expect that we would have almost 300 trees to have to remove or prune. So the question is, how would the township be able to handle something like this? Now, even though it says on the suggestion as 1 year, that is not what we're recommending. We talked to John Rice, and he mentioned that we are legally within our right to spread this out over a multi-year period, and that is what the township is suggesting, that we handle something like this in a 1 to 3 year period. And we have the parks, we talked to Director Cohen for Parks and Rec, and we have all the parks listed in highest activity to least activity, and that's how we would go about doing it. So out of the 14 parks, we would take maybe 5 1 year, 5 another year, and then 4 the very last year. And that is how we would spread it out. And just to go on to the last part that I want to make sure that we touch on. If anyone is wondering about our process for how we evaluate the parks, or at least the timeline of it, we've been averaging about 1 to 2 years for assessing the parks, doing evaluations for them. But there's no concrete formula. If someone wanted to say, okay, well, how are you doing it? Where is that written? How do we know that's what you're following? We don't have that. So we're going to have that documented, and we're going to go before the shade tree and consult with them, park supervisor, our township arborist, and formulate that so that anyone will be able to see what process we go by and from now to the future. And Go ahead, Commissioner.
I have a question about your strategy for approaching it by park. Is there a way to?
I think someone said to turn your mic on. Sorry.
Sorry. And you're presenting the strategy to address these by park. Within that determination, is there a park that has more high-risk trees, or is there possibly thought to strategize based on how dangerous, speaking to kind of our knowledge of risk, is there a way to rate the risk of every tree and do it by which ones we're most concerned about rather than where they are located? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. And when we had talked about that and we had met internally, we thought it was better to go by where most people are gathered. So all of the parks are, all of the trees are risk. So it'd be kind of hard to break them out and say, these trees are worse off than that. As John mentioned, these are all high-risk trees. So to say which one is 10 or 2 or 5 or 8, they're all risk. But what we did figure was, let's take it by park and which one is used most. And that's how we broke it down.
Can I ask you, when you say high risk, what does that mean? Does that mean it could fall down, something could fall off in a month, in 6 months, in a year? Because if that hits somebody, it's going to kill them or worse.
So we use what's called a track risk assessment. It's a formula, it's quantitative. And we input all the data about the tree, the target, the risk rating, what the defects are, and it spits out a number. And that's based on the amount of risk that involved with that one subject tree.
Right, that doesn't answer my question. Does it give you, this tree in 3 months, something's going to fall off? Next week?
It
6
does.
months?
It does, within
does.
1 year. All these trees are within 1 year.
So, okay, within 1 year is a month, is within 1 year. Does it do that?
Yes.
Okay, so are we categorizing them by, listen, you better take this down by the end of June? This one has to go by the end of July? This has to go by the end, are we doing it that way?
We are in the process of working through that, yes.
So it's not done yet?
That is not done yet,
And
correct.
when will that be done?
When we come back to you, like this was just the introduction so that you have the information. As far as our plan to formulate, we'll have that when we come back to you after we've talked to Shade Tree.
And when is that?
I would say 2 months. Shade Tree's end of the month. And then we have to take whatever changes are mentioned and then bring it back to you in beginning of June, hopefully, one of the June meetings. Say it again?
There's one.
We only have one meeting in June, and it's well into
Yeah.
June, so,
Okay,
yeah.
that gives us more time.
Are you done, Kathy?
No, but it may give us more time, but it may not give the tree or the person walking under it more time. I will tell you, I had a branch fall off,
And-
a car was driving by. Luckily, it was not a convertible.
And the
I'm
the one
telling you.
thing that I will say, Commissioner, I've had bids before where we had trees, and when they started to fail, we removed the tree.
Okay,
So all of them will not fail. Will some fail? Yes, but we react once we see a branch falling off, and we went out on the bike trail. There were trees that were marked to be removed. By the time the bid was processed, and that's the other part of this, we do have to put it out the bid, so that is going to take time. So anything over 25,000 has to go through the bid process, so there's nothing we can do to negate that. So unfortunately, that's where we're at with that process. But, we can operate and take some trees down before that, if you so choose. That is up to you if you want us to do it a different way. But following the rules that were set in place is kind of, while we're here, and again, just to give the information.
I guess when you tell me that once you see a branch has fallen, then you'll take it down, but if it's hit somebody, then it's too late. I find this disturbing, I'm just saying.
It's trees. I wish I had a better answer for how to deal with the trees and them, decaying or getting old.
I'm just finding and not faulting you, Ricky, or anyone on staff, but I am finding the response inconsistent with things that we've heard in the past. A year ago, 2 years ago, I was here asking for a bench to be on the trail, and it took months to figure that out because our insurer was saying that trees have fallen on the path before, and so there are risks and there are concern there. Yet we have trees marked with 2 marks since January, and they're literally standing next to benches at the parks. and we don't seem to be concerned at that point.
I would definitely say we're concerned, and it happened in February. The evaluation was done in February.
Okay, so February. So
and-
we're at 4 or 5 months in.
Yeah, yeah. And we had to meet internally and talk about the plan so that we can have this together for you to see. And now we're here asking for direction. If you want us to skip going to Shade Tree, I mean, we can skip some steps, you know, if you'd like to move faster.
Yeah, Madam President, if I could, so a couple of things. On any given day, at any point in time, we are always balancing the forces between the folks in the community that feel very strongly about saving as many trees as possible on an ongoing basis versus the reality that exists that when you have a tree canopy like Radnor, there is always a risk associated with them, and with trees failing and branches falling. This assessment, we always knew that there was going to be a time element to it. It obviously took some time to do the assessment. What we're proposing tonight is a process that brings as much public discussion into it as possible, because it was such a large number of trees, and we've had other projects and other conversations in this room where trees were needed to come down or were part of the discussion or part of the project, and it was full stop because of the impact to the trees. So what we're trying to be tonight is sensitive to the community and the tree canopy, while at the same time trying to move forward with addressing the analysis that was done and the reality that there are these trees that have been identified. And then the third element to that, which is it's real, is trying to also be sensitive somewhat to the township's budget. And this, you know, the estimated cost for this entire program is well over $350,000. That's not a bid number. That is an estimate. Obviously, when we go out to bid, as we've seen with other other projects, you know, whatever the bidding environment is what's going to dictate those prices. So that number could balloon from there. So we're trying to be sensitive to the budget as well. So the purpose of tonight was to bring some context to the study that was done, that the board knew was going on over the last couple of months when we started to see the purple marks show up on the trees, and then to move it to Shade Tree for another public discussion and input on the process by which we want to address the trees, and then come back to the board with a full recommendation that includes input from the Shade Tree on how we address this situation in this report. So it's not a matter of trying to be inconsistent or indifferent or not sound like we're not concerned about the tree situation. It's trying to balance all of those different elements that are in play at the same time. And just to address the liability concern, we did talk to the insurance, and without mincing words, it will always be sued from just purely liability. Not, you know, obviously, we don't want to see anything happen to anyone in terms of trees falling, either person or property. But from a purely liability standpoint, the township does it. It is reasonably acceptable that the township has a process it has to go through to determine how these things are managed, and it's acceptable that there's some time associated with that, including processes, bids, budgetary constraints, all of those different elements. So again, we've had that conversation with the insurance company. If the worst should happen, certainly the township's going to get pulled into that. But the legal defense is that the township is aware, and we are taking steps to address. I mean, that would happen tomorrow without this report if a tree were to fall. And going back to the example on the trail a number of years ago, was a perfectly healthy tree on a day like today. So, and that liability was always at the front of the mind of our insurance broker. So hopefully that helps kind of address some of the concerns about the report itself, what it's telling us we need to do, and these other elements that we're trying to balance in what is being presented tonight.
So I have a couple of questions, but first I would say, let's try to do this at a clip. I mean, as practically as you can, get it to Shade Tree, get it back to us. You know, internal discussions need to happen in between those, and let's keep going. I have one question that's rather silly, is what is Hugler?
Yeah, that was supposed to be Hugler First Responders Park.
Oh,
Yeah. I'm sorry.
got it. Okay, that's fine. And then I guess my other question is there a financial benefit to doing like a whole park at a time where you have the tree guys there and their chippers and their, you know, the whole team of people versus trying to do a risk assessment and say, you know, this one looks really bad and it's close to a bench or whatever. I mean, is there a benefit to doing one location at a time,
So,
financially?
Absolutely, but we have a Class A, B, and C category for all our inventory trees. So once the board, yourself, Mr. White, and Ricky come back to me and say, hey, we're going to spend X amount of dollars per year, I'm going to go back and reprioritize that inventory and give you a final list.
Okay, sounds good. And then it sounds as if the 10 years or so since we've gone through most of these parks is too long. Is that something we could put to Shade Tree to think about time intervals for assessing trees?
Sure.
I mean, just as long as you're there talking about trees, perhaps it could be something that comes up under discussion, because I don't think any of us are knowledgeable enough to answer that.
And didn't Shade Tree also, some of their members made it that they had specific parks that they looked at? Like that was like recent, like they would take care of. I know like Parks and Rec is doing that also, like looking at parks.
Yeah, I mean, I remember from being at Shade Tree, we did have parks that they were looking at. Usually it was where they were doing their plantings.
Yeah.
And they had a couple tree projects they did. Phillip Home was one, Hartford Park was another. So yes, they have went out and done a committee, you know, study of certain parks, yes.
And then the Shade Tree, their meetings next week is their meeting.
Yes.
Next Wednesdays.
I have just a quick question is, where do we talk about the replanting? I mean, we're losing 100+ trees, right? 200? So is that something that will be mapped out in your strategy? Is it something that Shade Tree will
Yeah, Shade-
opine on? How do
Yeah.
we talk about putting trees back where we're taking trees away?
Yeah,
So part of this inventory, we also cataloged the amount of inches, DB8 inches, that's going to be lost. So we're going to talk to Shade Tree about capturing those trees in replacement form.
And that would be their sort of typical replacement numbers?
That is correct.
Perfect.
Yep.
Good. Excellent. Thank you for your hard work. both.
John, off the top of your head, how many of those are the 30-inch in diameter?
There's not many 30 inches. I don't have the exact count, Jake, but there's not many 30
Okay.
inches.
And then I've got a question not related to this, but, you know, yeah, I've seen it in past years, and it's been picking up again in the last couple of weeks, where overflow parking has now decided to park on the lawn in our parks. What kind of damage do vehicles do when they park over tree, or under trees, but over root systems?
Obviously, compaction, which is one of the greatest killers of trees in the urban infrastructure. Again, it would have to be repetitive over a long period of time.
Yeah, so can I just ask, when you're out in the parks in the future, if you see that, can you let the board be
Absolutely.
aware of that?
Most certainly.
All right, thanks.
Can I just ask a couple questions? Or just really well, it's two, because we already talked about replacement plans. Do we have this report in detail by park? You do. Could we have a copy? I mean, this is a great summary, but I'd like to have the full risk assessment, if possible, with the inventory. That'd be really awesome, so we just get a sense, like, one of my parks is on there, I just want to kind of go line by line, that'd be great.
We can do that.
The other piece is, like, in just getting to what some other commissioners said, I know you have a risk assessment by tree. Do we have any that you think are posing immediate safety issues that we may just want to go around the process and have removed, just in case we feel like they are imminently dangerous to have up, given that they've been marked? If not, then we can go through the flow. I guess the reason I pose that is because I'd be more than happy to talk about removing anything that's dangerous, especially for anyone right now, if we think we have that level of accuracy in the risk.
Yep. So we do have some ash trees that are obviously immediate concerns. Rick and I are going to actually meet to look at those and maybe have a separate bid structure for those.
Yeah, maybe we could get a report back, and if we need to have like a special session or conversation about that, maybe we could get that done just to make sure that we're, treating the safety issue at least with quickness, and the process is the process, right, for the rest of it. But,
Correct.
Just something to bring up. But otherwise, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, we meet again next week and then not until June, well into June, so make it snappy.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. All right, public participation. Do we have anyone that wants to speak to any issue at this point? Of course, you'll have opportunities later. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there any item on the consent agenda that any commissioners or the public would like to pull? Yeah, sure. No problem. Item C, all right. Any others? Seeing none, and seeing none from the public. So we'll start with item C, Resolution 2024-66, awarding the annual HVAC maintenance contract for the Radnor Township Building, Public Works Facility, and Radnor Activity Center to J.J. White Incorporated in the amount of $23,700. Could I have a motion, please? At a second?
Second.
Okay. Kathy?
I guess, Bill, how often do they go up on the roof and check the HVAC system? It's on the roof, I assume, right, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm actually going to defer to Mr. Foster.
Oh, okay, sorry, Rick.
Yeah, Commissioner, I don't have the answer to how often they go up on the roof to inspect. I mean, I know it's quarterly that they do their inspections.
Okay.
So if it's an exact month, I don't have that for you. I can get it, though.
And how long, have they been doing this for years? Like, they're the usual person and we just keep?
Yeah,
we-
yeah, they keep recurring because it's been under the 25,000. So I think every year, from the notes that I have, it goes up about $1,000.
No, I don't, it's not the amount. I'm wondering, how long have they been our HVAC people?
Oh, that I'd have to do research on how long we've had them. It was before I became director, so I'd have to look into that.
Okay. Because apparently we have a roof problem, and if they're up on the roof, I'm wondering if they ever bring us to our attention, since they're up there 4 times a year, apparently, if they come every quarter, how, the situation on the roof.
This engagement is specific to the units themselves and how
Yeah.
they're functioning. I can't say I've ever seen a roof, any kind of assessment on their part
No,
about the roof
that's not my,
situation.
you have someone come in and looks at your HVAC and says, oh, by the way, your hot water heater's leaking, or, hey, your floor underneath here is starting to buckle. Not that it's their job to do so.
Yeah, no, they have not reported any of that in the last 4 years,
Okay.
specific to the units. At least, at Public Works, it may be different. I don't know if when they're there, if they've come to you guys and mentioned anything, they might
Because of
put up
the
the white
issues
flag on that one.
I'm sorry, because of the issues we've been having with the roof,
Yeah.
as of, I mean, it's been years. I think we knew we've had issues with it way before.
They showed up.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner questions? No? Any public questions? Not on this issue. Good. Resolution, let's have a vote on Resolution 2024-66. All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. Okay, consent agenda, items A, B, D, E, and F. Could I have a motion, please? And a second? Okay. And I'll call the vote on those. All in favor? Great. Thank you. Moving on to the business agenda. Item A is the motion to approve d'Orsay Homeowners Association amendment. Could I have a motion, please? And a second? Okay, Mr. Rice, I believe you're going to start us out on this one.
Yes. This is a residential subdivision that was approved in the early 90s, I believe. And there's an HOA that governs some of the common land. And at the time, the approval required any amendments in the future come back before the board. And some of it's in Radnor, some of it's in Easttown Township. So what I received from the HOA council was a proposed amendment to the HOA, the association documents. And if you look at the amendment, pretty straightforward. I also spoke to the attorney, Mr. Doyle, and basically they're doing two things. They're amending plans and specifications parts to add more architectural requirements for anybody that's going to build a home or increase the size of their home. So you have some architectural requirements that weren't there before. And then there's also an enforcement provision which deals with enforcement of their covenants. So it's a fairly simple thing. It's a small amendment, and these typically come back, depending on the terms of the approval, come back when there's changes like this. This is not a substantial change.
Thank you very much. Any commissioner questions or comments?
So I guess this is for you, Solicitor. I've been on the board for several years, and we've never had to approve an HOA agreement. So can you give me some background on why this is coming before the board, why we have to vote on it?
Because the original approval in the early 90s required any amendments go back to Easttown and to Radnor. And quite frankly, that's a pretty good provision to have in HOA documents, because you approve subdivisions with certain conditions, and then HOAs, if they don't have to come back, who knows what they're doing in some cases. I mean, I'll give you a bad example, but a fresh example, Montparnasse. That litigation came out of an HOA amendment that came in front of this board that sort of fell through the cracks. Some of you know that whole story, some of you don't, but it goes back to the original approval. And Radnor did that on this particular project. And I think on some other projects, this is the only one that I've seen since I've been here, but I know there's other ones out there.
So if it's good practice, is there any way to work with HOAs to build this in for all of them?
I think that, and you're going to have some coming in front of you with land development plans. One of the conditions, because they have to present the HOA documents to the township, we typically review them, and that's something that I would always put into a HOA document. So if someone gets a subdivision or land development approved, and there's a planned community or condo association set of documents, that's always a condition that I request be added to those documents. So that, once it's approved, it's approved. If they're doing something substantial, and this is really not substantial, but typically the condition is any amendments come back to the township. So it's been since 1994, you haven't seen any amendments on this project. I wasn't even aware of it until I got this, from council for the association.
Great, thank you for that information.
I do wonder if this one is because it is divided into two different counties, two different townships, and they wanted everybody to be on the same playing field. I don't know. Is there any public participation on this issue? Seeing none, I am going to call a vote on the approval of the Dorsey Homeowner Association amendments. All in favor? Aye. Unanimous.
Abstention?
Oh, abstention. Sorry. Thank you. Commissioner Larkin abstains. Item B is the approval for one conditional employment offer for Radnor Township Police Department, filling the vacancy from an officer who recently resigned. The conditional offer would bring the police staffing to the full complement of 50 officers. Could I have a motion, please?
So moved.
And a second. Chief Flanagan, do you have anything to add to that? Or is it?
Yes, thank you, Board of Commissioners. I just wanted to bring everybody's attention in the community. We were just before the board replacing another officer who had left. Since that time, we had a recent, somebody's able to move on, so we do have another opening. So we just want to make sure there was clarity on the issue. Again, we're not exceeding our staffing levels. We're remaining at 50. Luckily, we have a list established. We'll be able to start 2 new officers to fill the 2 vacancies and train them together and make it work as easily as possible.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to call a vote on the approval of the conditional employment of one officer. All in favor? Aye. That one's unanimous. And item C is ordinance 2024-05. It's an introduction of an ordinance of Radnor Township, Delaware County, Pennsylvania, approving a cable franchise agreement for a 5-year term between Radnor Township and Verizon Pennsylvania, LLC. Could I have a motion, please?
So moved.
And a second? Thank you. Mr. White.
Thank you. Some brief history on this ordinance up for introduction tonight. Back in 2020-21, when the Board of Commissioners finalized the franchise agreement with Comcast, we had at that time re-engaged Cohen Law Group to begin negotiating the Verizon franchise agreement, which had expired in 2019, 2021. So Cohen has been working to that end for the last couple of years. The purpose of the franchise agreement, it allows Verizon to operate cable services here in Radnor Township, so our residents have the opportunity to purchase cable from Verizon or Comcast. Those are the 2 franchises we allow. In return for the ability to use the township's right-of-way to provide that cable service, Verizon will pay the township. There's many considerations the township and the residents get back as a result of this, including customer service requirements, wire and cleanliness requirements. There is also revenue to the township in terms of 2 sources. The larger of the 2 is the franchise fee, which is for this renewal is set at 5%. That's the maximum allowed by federal law, and it's the same percentage as the township has had with Verizon going back to when they first started in Radnor Township back in 2006. That 5% generates roughly $215,000 to the township per year. That amount, coincidentally, is down from about $315,000 per year back in 2016 as a result of more and more people moving away from traditional cable services to streaming services. But it's still $215,000 or roughly per year. The second source of income is aimed at capital expenses associated with what is termed as the PEG portion of this. PEG standing for Public, Education, and Government. Those are the cable channels that our meetings, the school district's meetings, are broadcast on, and then the public access piece, the township outsources to Radnor Studio 21. So they have their programming for that piece of it. That is set at 1 3/4%. That too is the same amount as the expiring agreement with Verizon, and that generates roughly $100,000 per year. The gross revenues associated with that are slightly different than those from the franchise. The agreement spells out the definition for each of those categories. For the township, the use of those monies, for the franchise piece, it's deposited in the general fund and offsets the township's cost for operating our public information office, which includes this room and the broadcasting of all of our public meetings, as well as our other forms of communication and the websites, the emergency contact through Code Red, and all of those and the payroll and associated costs with all of those expenses. The PEG piece, because of our arrangement with Radnor Studio 21, a significant portion of that is used to pay for the rent of the facility, and then also some contribution to Radnor Studio 21 for their costs as well. The term of this agreement, the expiring one with Verizon was a 15-year agreement. Given the landscape of cable services right now and a lot of the uncertainties, the longest term we could get for this agreement is 5 years. So what's in front of you tonight is a 5-year agreement. We did talk in executive session too about there are two other significant changes in this agreement versus the expiring one. One being there's 2 additional categories of revenue that will now fall within gross revenue. That's beneficial to the township in that we get the 5% franchise fee on those 2 sources of income. Both involve additional money subscribers would pay for sporting events or pay-per-view events. The other significant change in this agreement versus the expiring one is a termination capability from Verizon's perspective. The language gets pretty complicated, but a very simple terms, if in any one 12-month period they lose 6% of their subscriptions, that triggers their ability to then give the township a 12-month advance notice of terminating the agreement. So it's a 5-year term. If the worst should happen, that process in and of itself is going to take 2 of those years. And it was noted in the executive summary from Cohen that in looking back, there's never been, even in the decline over the last decade, there's never been a year where 6% was reached. So it's obviously an uncertain situation, but one that could exist again because of the landscape of streaming services. So that's what's in front of you tonight. This is the introduction of the ordinance that would extend the Verizon franchise agreement for a 5-year term, which would begin upon ratification. The 5-year clock starts when the board ratifies the agreement. As things exist now, if introduced tonight, given the advertising requirements, we would be back in front of the board at the June meeting for adoption. So the 5-year clock would start after adoption, and once the documents are all signed, another week or so after that.
Thank you. Any commissioner questions or comments? Any public questions or comments? Come up, Sarah.
Sarah Pilling, 29 Garrett Avenue. I know that it's more evident in the smaller neighborhoods than the bigger neighborhoods, but is there any way to nudge Comcast or Verizon to clean up some of these downed wires that are just tangled up in telephone poles? It looks awful, and it also is a danger to pedestrians who are walking up the sidewalk and can easily get tangled up in these wires.
Yes. So
thank you.
If there's one request is that the township has a program called Radnor Connect. It's a program where folks can go in and identify work order type issues. We have a category for this because it is throughout town, and it is a source of constant issues and concerns like the one you raised. Those will automatically be routed to our property maintenance inspector, our part-time property maintenance inspector, who has had a reasonably high level of success in getting the 2 cable companies to move in terms of cleaning up issues. The unrelated issue of double poles and transferring from one pole to the other during that process is not something we have a great deal of control or power over. It's still something that Bill Bruno works on. But this one, we should be able to move on. These complaints, we should move on, and we've had a little bit higher degree of success in trying to get them cleaned up. They're still everywhere. I wish I had a better way to solve that going forward, but I think they're always trying to prepare for the next run, so they leave a coil of a couple hundred feet hanging up there. And yeah, it creates these types of problems.
Well, I will say, there's one area where you don't see it as much anymore, and it's in West Wayne, and it's because of efforts from the neighbors and Bill Bruno that we have taken down all nuisance wires, and now we're focused on double poles. So to Bill's point, call, email, go through your commissioner, and the township will work with these companies to get those wires cleaned up.
Thank you. All right, so we need to, I guess it's an introduction. We have to take a vote anyway. A vote on the introduction of ordinance 2024-05. All in favor? Aye. It's unanimous. And that concludes our business agenda. Any reports from board liaisons? Seeing none. Any new business? Any old business? Final public participation? And seeing none, can I have a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor? We're adjourned.